Well, many people trust doctors for their healthcare needs, right? Doctors are educated, they're research, they read the research, they keep up with the research. But what if the doctors are misled or manipulated by studies they rely on for evidence-based medicine sometimes? In this video, I want to talk about medical ghostwriting. Now, you've probably heard of ghostwriting before, where a hired writer authors a book like a celebrity memoir or a politician's campaign book, where the author is listed as the celebrity or the politician themselves, but the person behind the words is often a professional writer who is paid, bound by a contract, and usually remains invisible. But what if I told you that this also happens in medicine, where the author of a study in a top medical journal that guides patient care didn't actually write it? That a pharmaceutical company can hire a marketing firm to draft a favorable article for their product and then pay an academic or researcher to put their name on it. It may sound crazy, but it's true, and I'm gonna use examples in this video to show you. We know that medical studies can shape scientific narratives, clinicians' beliefs, and influence prescribing drugs that we patients take. So think of the downstream impact of medical ghostwriting. If a drug is marketed based on carefully crafted narratives written by professional writers rather than researchers directly involved in the trials or using raw patient data, how can they be truly informed of all the side effects and even potential deaths? Now, we have proof that medical ghostwriting is responsible for harm and even death in some people while remaining hidden and completely legal. In this video, I'm going to talk about what ghostwriting is and how it works, why the academics and doctors claim ownership of the work they didn't write or maybe weren't even involved in, how widespread it is, or it might be. I'll show some real-world examples that were revealed through courts, cases, and settlements. Do doctors know about ghostwriting? We'll try to answer that question. And what patients can do, if anything at all. What is medical ghostwriting? Let's start there. Medical ghostwriting is when a pharmaceutical or a medical device company hires a writer, often through a medical communications or marketing agency, to draft a study, editorial, or a clinical trial report promoting their product. That writer is never credited for that work and must stay silent, bound by strict NDAs, non-disclosure agreements. They're usually given only summarized trial data, not full raw patient-level data sets. They used those summaries to craft a study in favor of the product, always in favor of the product. Ghostwriters are paid by the drug or device company through communications agencies contracted by them. Once they finish the manuscript, when the ghostwriter finishes the manuscript, it's given to a doctor, researcher, or an academic. They're usually referred to as key opinion leaders or KOLs. They put their name on it, sign off, and submit it to the medical journal. Sometimes they review it, sometimes they do not, but their name gives the article legitimacy and ownership, as they are usually highly regarded in their field. So why do they do it, you might ask, and what's in it for them? Because their name goes on the paper, they get to claim authorship on their CV, in grant applications, media interviews, and in return they might get consulting fees, speaking gigs, or research funding worth tens of thousands of dollars or more. But it's not always about the money. The author credit brings them prestige, career advancement, and credibility. And for some, that incentive is enough to lend their name to work that they barely touched. So what ends up looking as an independent work can often be a carefully managed narrative or just strategic marketing, basically. If the ghostwriter is paid by the same sponsor as the clinical trial, even if it's through a marketing company, that doesn't sound ethical to me at all. And think about it, we cannot really know how involved the author or the KOL was in the written paper. We cannot know who the real author or the ghostwriter was, and we have no idea what the raw trial data the research that was based on was. The role of the ghostwriter is to make the product look safe and effective. So once the key opinion leader signs off on the study, it's submitted to the journal, right? So do the journals know, and how does it pass the peer review process, you may wonder? So even though journals have authorship guidelines, the enforcement is usually really weak. There are no universal laws requiring disclosure of ghostwriters, and yes, this practice may be unethical, like I stated, but it's not illegal. Peer reviewers assume the listed authors did the writing. They aren't typically asked to audit who drafted the manuscript. And reviewers don't get access to raw trial data to double check for accuracy. If the writing looks credible, the paper usually just gets accepted. Now, do we know how widespread medical ghostwriting is? And unfortunately, because like I said, it's hidden, we don't know. It's hidden by design. There's no law that requires authorship transparency. Medical journals don't audit the process, and you cannot find out through FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, because it doesn't apply to private companies. Many ghostwriting revelations usually come out from internal emails, memos, court orders during lawsuits, leaks, or whistleblowers. But even then, the burden of proof is really high. To prove ghostwriting in a high-stakes litigation, one needs a smoking gun, documents, contemporaneous drafts, or internal emails, but many cases don't ever get that far in court. So here is what some credible sources report. In 2010, the US Senate's Charles Grassley investigation documented evidence of ghostwriting across multiple therapeutic areas, including drugs and some devices. An anonymous journal editor told the Chuck Grassley Senate investigation that about 1 in 3 manuscripts submitted to his journal involved ghostwriting. And as reported by POGO, Project on Government Oversight, some critics believe that 50% or more of industry-sponsored publications use ghostwriters. 50%. In psychiatry, there is speculation that some drug classes may have almost all sponsored papers ghostwritten. That's also reported by POGO. And you will see in my examples that I bring up that there's several there's going to be several antidepressants in my examples. Bottom line is that ghostwriting is not rare at all. It's deeply rooted in the system, and uncovering it is almost impossible. So we cannot confidently know how widespread it is, unfortunately. But let's look at some of those real world cases, examples. The first one I have is Paxil, made by GlaxoSmithKline. It's an antidepressant, an SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, marketed as safe and effective for adolescents. In 2001, there was a study 329. It was ghostwritten by a medical communications firm hired by GSK, GlaxoSmithKline. The article claimed Paxil was safe and effective for teens, but internal trial data ended up showing increased suicidal thoughts and behaviors. Many families later blamed Paxil for adolescent suicide attempts and even deaths. So in 2012, GSK ended up paying $3 billion in federal settlement over fraud, misbranding, including charges related to the publication of Study 329. The ghostwriting that GSK used was scientific therapeutic information, STI. The next example is Vioxx, which I think many of you might have heard about. It was a huge scandal. It was a drug for painkiller for arthritis and inflammation. It was made by Merck. It was approved in 1999. And it was promoted heavily through ghostwritten journal articles that downplayed cardiovascular risks. And then later, internal memos revealed that Merck employees authored many of these papers and then recruited outside academics to sign off as authors. Up to 60,000 people died, and between 88 and 140,000 serious cardiovascular events were linked to Vioxx before it was pulled from the market in 2004. And in 2007, Merck paid $4.85 billion to settle more than 25,000 lawsuits. The ghostwriting firm that Merck used was the internal employees and external medical communications agencies. The next example was Zoloft, Prempro, and Neurontin. All of these drugs were either made by Pfizer or by a drug company that was later acquired by Pfizer. The first example is Zoloft, which is also an SSRI antidepressant, widely prescribed for depression and anxiety. In 2013, legal filings revealed that Pfizer had coordinated the creation of dozens of ghostwritten articles promoting Zoloft's efficacy. Despite internal trial data showing it often performed no better than a placebo, ghostwriters drafted the articles and academics were recruited to sign off. Millions were prescribed Zoloft under misleading efficacy claims, Some patients suffered worsening symptoms, side effects, or delays in receiving appropriate treatment. And even though, of course, Pfizer denied wrongdoing, they faced lawsuits, including by the state of Louisiana and a class action filed in 2013. Next example is Prempro. Prempro was a hormone replacement therapy for menopausal women. It was made by Wyeth, that was later acquired by Pfizer. Now, not to be confused with the bioidentical hormones heavily promoted today. Prempro was a hormone made from horse urine. So it was a hormone therapy for menopausal symptoms, and Wyeth used a firm called Design Right to ghostwrite at least 26 favorable articles promoting the drug. These articles minimized the serious risks like breast cancer, stroke, heart disease, and despite growing concerns from independent studies. Thousands of women ended up developing breast cancer and cardiovascular conditions after using Prempro. And Wyeth, later acquired by Pfizer, paid close to $1 billion in settlements by the late 2000s. My last example is Neurontin, made by Warner Lambert, later acquired by Pfizer. They used STI, Scientific Therapeutic Information Company, to ghostwrite articles and manage publication plans for Neurontin. The drug was approved by the FDA in 1993 for partial seizures only, but later was promoted off-label and aggressively marketed for nerve pain, chronic pain syndromes, migraines, and bipolar disorder, despite little or no solid evidence for many of these uses. The internal documents later showed the company systematically used ghostwritten papers to exaggerate the efficacy and minimize negative trial results. For example, in one bipolar study, was study 945224, Neurontin showed no benefit, yet ghostwritten publications still portrayed it as effective. Academics were recruited to sign off and lend credibility. And of course, there were legal repercussions, and in 2004, Warner Lambert, by then owned by Pfizer, paid $430 million to settle charges of illegal off-label promotion. Later, Pfizer added further settlements, such as $325 million class action settlement in 2014 to cover additional claims related to this drug's marketing. This case became a landmark in exposing how off-label promotion and ghostwritten literature can reshape an entire market. Neurontin became a blockbuster, but because of marketing tactics, not because of its efficacy and independent evidence. And by the way, Neurontin is still promoted and prescribed for nerve pain, neuropathy, migraines, and so on. I wonder if the prescribers know that the studies on Neurontin were ghostwritten and that the efficacy is actually low. So do doctors know about ghostwriting, or do they believe it if you tell them? It's hard to say. Many doctors are unaware, I think, how deeply ghostwriting is woven into the medical literature. I think they're trained to trust the peer-reviewed journals and usually reject the idea that science could be so manipulated. You have some academics that will admit to being offered authorship of ghostwritten work, so they know, and others refuse to accept the scale of the issue. They think it's really rare. But here's the crux. When ghostwritten research underpins patient care guidelines and drug approvals, doctors inadvertently rely on marketing disguised as science. And when patients take drugs and report side effects from said drugs, they're often dismissed because the doctor can refer to the study and say, oh, this side effect was not included in the study, it's not the drug. As I was doing research for this video, I started thinking about the GLP-1 drugs, right? Because they're everywhere. You cannot not see them, you cannot ignore, they're everywhere. The weight loss drugs that almost everybody is on now. And all those lawsuits that are coming out about these GLP-1 drugs. And even though I could not find any evidence, no proof that the studies on GLP-1 drugs were ghostwritten, but I know there are 2,000 lawsuits or 2,000 people are suing the manufacturers because they're suffering side effects they were never warned about, like gastroparesis, blindness, pancreatitis, possible thyroid cancer, and the list goes on. What if the trials minimized or hid the risks and hired ghostwriters who wrote favorable studies based on which doctors think these drugs are safe and patients readily take them. Now we'll have to wait and see what comes out of the litigation, but if ghostwriting is uncovered, I will not be surprised at all. So what can patients realistically do, if anything at all? And I would say always be curious and ask a lot of questions. Always verify. Read beyond the headlines and the drug inserts, and please do read the drug inserts. Look for independent studies and meta-analyses. Trust your intuition. Learn your body and cultivate a sense of sovereignty over your health. Ask your doctor if he or she knows more about the studies upon which the drugs are based on, who funded them, who wrote them, what risks may be underreported. Or research it yourself. Trust your gut and yes, do your own research. For example, I've been prescribed Neurontin many times and declined it each time because I saw the issues with it. I found them through researching. So next time your doctor prescribes you a new medication, I would suggest, this is totally up to you of course, I would suggest to go do your own research. Go research it, see if there are any lawsuits attached to this drug. Talk to other patients who are taking this drug, who have been taking it. Ask them. Take an anecdotal evidence into account. It's also evidence. After all, it's your health, it's your body, and you should be fully informed. And now you know that sometimes doctors may not be aware that the drugs that they prescribed may be based on ghostwritten research that usually hides or omits or minimizes side effects of drugs. And if you are the one who ends up with a side effect of a drug that the doctor may have never read about, you at least will be aware and you will be able to go do your research. And last but not least, I make these videos just to bring attention to things in our healthcare that may help uncover reasons why we are all so sick, to look in the dark corners and shadows of the system that we know is corrupt, and to make people think and search deeper beneath the surface, always. Because something does not add up. Our healthcare system claims to be based in evidence-based practice. We're told to trust the science, follow the science, but when the science is manipulated, when you find out that the science is manipulated or can be manipulated to sell a product, that sounds more like marketing than science. Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please feel free to comment, subscribe, and also let me know if you've heard about medical ghostwriting before. And what do you think about it? Do you think it's ethical, unethical? Do you care? Do you not necessarily care? I'm very interested to see what others think. I'm Monica, a medical harm recovery and prevention coach. I've been a nurse for almost 20 years, and a few years ago I became a board-certified nurse coach and a neurodynamic breathwork facilitator. I got into this work because 13 years ago I was harmed by what was supposed to be a routine procedure, a bilateral tubal ligation. It took me 3 years to find a doctor who actually believed me and helped me after at least a dozen dismissing me. 3 years later, a close family member went through a vaccine injury and we both experienced the same disbelief, gaslighting, and abandonment from the very system that harmed us. Our healing happened outside that system, and that's when I realized how deeply broken and unaccountable medicine has become. And now I help others avoid what we went through or recover from it by rebuilding trust in their bodies and their own inner healing intelligence and reclaiming their power over their healthcare decisions.